Okay, ladies and gentlemen, come dive into the open minds where you can broaden your perspectives, expand your horizons, and open your eyes to a reality never thought possible. Just remember, once you open that door, there's no going back. I am your host, Robbie Diesel. This is the Open Mind Show. This is season 2, and tonight I have a very important and special guest, Nicole Sirotek. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good.
All right. I appreciate you coming on in short notice. I know the audience doesn't know, but I just got in contact with you about an hour ago, and here we are talking. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, no problem. My phone number is like a download secret thing. So you got to know somebody that knows somebody to get the number.
Well, I guess I got lucky, so I
You did.
appreciate
You
it.
got lucky that you know someone that goes to school that has kids that go to school with my kid.
Wow, that's amazing. But anyways, I kind of wanted to get into the background of who you are and what you do exactly.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicole Sirotek. I'm a registered nurse. I've been a registered nurse for over a decade now. My specialty is ICU trauma, flight, and now I guess I'm like the world's leading nurse expert on COVID consultation. Um, so if you really want to know who I am, you could just Google my name, Nicole Sirotek. I'm the original New York nurse whistleblower from May of 2020. I am unfortunately the crying, foul-mouthed nurse in a break room saying they're murdering all my patients. And since May of 2020, it's been a wild ride trying to save everyone's life.
So talk to me.
And that's it.
Talk to me about what that was like, because I'm pretty sure that that brought not just positive attention, but a lot of negative attention to you in your life as well.
Yeah, so I originally, the day after Easter, I went to New York because the pandemic had just hit, and I was 4 months postpartum, and everyone was sheltering in place back then. And I told my husband, hey, I can really help my country out. I have ventilator skills as a flight nurse. I could definitely help. So I hop on a plane and I head to New York, and we get onto the units, and I got to tell you, it was it was just chaos. And mind you, most people don't know this, is I've actually worked what's called security contract jobs. I've worked overseas in epicenters before. I've worked Ebola. I've worked the measles outbreak. And before that, I've dealt with HIV outbreaks up and down the continent of Africa. So this is not anything new for me. And I get in there and people are just dying at alarming rates. It was insane how fast they were dying, so fast that we just had to start writing their name and date of birth with Sharpie on their leg. And then we would just pile their naked bodies up in the hallway and dam up the hallway with the gowns because we didn't have enough towels or linen or bedding. And we were going to have to reuse all that stuff until somebody can come get these bodies. It was a disaster like nothing I've ever seen. And I've worked in refugee camps overseas. And I'm like, what is going on with you people? And then you come to find out, by then it's your second shift and you're like, you start to get used to the chaos and you're like, what is going on here? And then you find out that you have podiatrists giving you orders. I mean, you have gynecologists giving you orders for vent settings. And I'm like, hey, bro, that's the wrong hole. You don't know how to intubate. We call that a Southern intubation. Go back to the OB ward. There were optometrists managing ventilators. And I'm like, what is even going on here? And then you find the nurses are school nurses. And I'm like, dude, I don't need a Band-Aid. I need someone to put in a chest tube and manage a chest tube. And, OB nurses and PACU nurses and OR nurses, you remember all the ORs were closed. And I'm like, what's even going on here? And the fact that nobody knew how to manage a ventilator was really what was killing people. Nobody knew how to manage chest tubes. Nobody knew how to manage sedation. Nobody knew how to manage, the medications necessary for paralyzing a patient. No one knew how to run chest compressions in a code. No one even knew what a code looked like. They didn't even know, like, when their ventilators were disconnected and their patient was dead.
Oh my
And it was
God.
the most insane thing I'd ever seen. And all in the meantime, you're saying, y'all, you guys are like killing these people because you don't know what you're doing. And in the meantime, they're giving you cookies and telling you you're doing a good job and clapping for you at 7 p.m. every day. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. What's going on? And, at the first hospital I was at, I was the nurse that had the patient that lived the longest. I was able to keep her alive for 2 weeks. And we had like all the patients had turned over about every 48 to 72 hours. You'd have an entirely new patient load than what was there because that's how fast they would die.
Wow.
And then when I tried to get her extubated, they're like, oh no. And then you start ruffling some feathers. And then they're like, well, we don't want you back. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't work here. I'm not even from the state. And then they reassigned me to another hospital. And then that's when pharma rolled up with their, clinical drug trials. And back then we were all so blind to think that this virus was so deadly that we're like, everyone's like, yeah, sure, well, whatever we can do to save these people's lives. And then you start watching these drugs kill people. As soon as you give it to them, they're dead in hours. And I'm like, and here's the thing with COVID is even if it's not COVID, you can tell when someone's going to die looking at their labs. They don't just like die. We can see this happening. And I'm like, hey, these drugs are killing these people. And no one wanted to listen. So I'm like, fine, I'll save my own people. Y'all don't want to listen. And then my patient who had been completely resolved of COVID, he was ready to be extubated. They're like, hey, we're going to start this drug trial. And I'm like, I literally said when the clinical drug trial lady came up, she's like, we're going to start this drug on your patient. I'm like, the fuck you aren't. I'm like, he's COVID negative times 3. I'm like, he's been here for 33 days. He needs to go home to life. We call it discharge to life.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, well, we're going to start this med on him. I'm like, what's it for? She's like, to treat COVID. And I'm like, well, he doesn't have COVID. So what are you treating? And she's like, well, we need to hang it. I'm like, I ain't hanging it. And she's like, then I'll hang it. I'm like, no, you won't. And she's like, well, then they'll send you back to the hotel, because I wasn't from that area. We were all staying in hotels. So I'm like, fucking send me back. I don't care. I came here to help you people. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. And so then they get, the supervisor, the nursing supervisor, and they're like, well, you need to hang it. And I'm actually, no, I don't. No, I don't. And then they tried to call in admin to make me hang it. And then they tried to call in the staffing agency to make me hang it. And I'm like, no, no, no. They're like, well, we'll fire you. And I'm like, fire me. I mean, I have a job at home, guys. I don't, with my skill set, I can go anywhere if I wanted to. I mean, not that I came to New York to help you people because, you're trying to help your country.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't do the drug on the patient. And then the next shift, I didn't get that patient, which I didn't think anything of it because sometimes you shuffle patients around. And then 2 hours into the shift, they moved me to another unit that's non-COVID. And they moved a nurse off that unit to move me up onto that unit. And it had 6 nurses to 4 patients. And I'm like, this is a rigged system. They don't want these people off these ventilators. And that's how I made that video. And
Wow.
if y'all want to know what drug that was, they were trying to make me hang. It was remdesivir, the failed Ebola drug that killed everyone when they were treating people with Ebola. And that's how they figured out the dosing and how not to kill people with it and COVID, because they killed about 300 people using the remdesivir drug.
Prior to the COVID outbreak?
Yeah, I mean, they were using it in the 2018 Ebola outbreak that I was there for. And it had a different call number for its clinical trial then. But, I ended up figuring it out after the fact, when you had an opportunity to look at this. And I'm just like, yeah, it's the same damn drug. And that's the one that they're giving everyone in the hospitals now. And everyone's now realizing that it's killing their livers and kidneys.
So it's not working even with the right amount that now.
Nope. The more doses you
Wow.
get, the statistical higher probability that you're going to die. And typically it's a daily regimen, IV infusion when you're in the hospital for 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
And by all means, please go to the Google it, and go to the actual drug manufacturer's website for that drug. It even tells you it's going to create elevated liver and kidney enzymes, and that it inactivates hydroxychloroquine. So you can't even use hydroxychloroquine after you get out of the hospital because it won't be valid.
So not only is it killing you slowly, but it's blocking any other drugs that would actually help you.
Just the hydroxychloroquine. And because they politicized hydroxychloroquine, we all went to Ivermectin, which, by the way, they've been using that for decades as an antiviral in South Africa.
Right.
And South America.
And I know a lot of people were online talking that, oh, it's horse dewormer, it's horse dewormer. But
it's always been a human medication. They repurposed it for like horses and dogs and stuff like that. Ketamine is the original horse med.
Okay. So when to go back, when you're talking about these bodies stacking up and you're just marking on the legs with the Sharpie, I know you said you work overseas, but you're mentioning here in the United States when you're talking about that, correct?
Yes, typically when we worked in refugee camps and things like that, like an example is like Syria or Haiti, where I've been, they'll dig short, shallow graves and then they line the bodies in, and typically they'll light them on fire in order to control infection control. But we can't really do that here in the United States. Plus, for the United States, come on, people. And so I'm like, hey guys, let's just stack them until the morgue people can come get them. Because remember, we had to use the freezer trucks, but we needed the beds. So what do you do with the bodies? We had an empty hallway, and I'm like, and this is typically what we did overseas. If a body was getting transported, you write their name and date of birth with Sharpie on the leg or on the torso. Typically, the leg is easier because of the way you stack the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we did, because nobody knew how to deal with the mass casualty situation, in the sense that there were lots of bodies to dispose of. And we would just have to wait for, and it was actually like the facility maintenance people, the people that would like work on the hospital or clean the floors, or,
Janitors,
janitorial
ultimately.
people.
Yeah.
That would come with like a little flatbed trolley you'd see at like Home Depot, because we were at a Gurney's,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just toss them on there and put them in there, and like wheel them down to the morgue, and or out to the back door into the freezer trucks. And I know it sounds deplorable that I can talk like this about it, but I mean, you don't have time to really think and process it. Most people were having psychological breakdowns on those units, but for me, it was just like, well, it's not bad. I mean, it'll be nice that their family can eventually have a funeral. I'm used to just lighting them on fire, or you don't even have family to get them back to, because you've got like a mass exodus to a refugee camp, and families have been split apart, and there's no place to store these bodies because you're in a desert, and it creates an infection control issue. So I'm like, oh, I guess this is a good idea for America. I mean, I definitely would have organized it a lot better. I mean, because it was really interesting. So once they froze the bodies or they transported them, their plan was for the National Guard to pick them up in minivans that they rented from rental car places,
Mm-hmm.
and put them in body bags, assuming we had body bags. If they didn't, we'd have to use sheets, and that was one of we ran out of. It was a nightmare. And so they'd get them in the body bags or the sheet. And this is why it was essential to make sure that the name was written on them so people could identify them. Because I mean, they didn't have hospital bands on them, because they were just triaging so many people so quickly that you want to be able to know who these people are.
Mm-hmm.
So National Guard would pick them up in minivans and then take them to the port. I can't remember what the name of the port is. And then they put them on a barge. The barge would take them to this little island called Hart Island, where they would, if you were a homeless person that was unidentified, they would just bury you on this island. It was like a pauper's grave. They've used it for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that they would get all the prisoners from Rikers prison, and they would use them as a chain gang to dig these graves. But then, because they were handling the bodies with no PPE, they all got COVID, went back to the prison, spread all the COVID. So then they let all the prisoners out on compassionate leave. And that is what accelerated your infection rates in New York. And so then they had to call in construction crews with construction equipment to dig the graves with the bodies. And if you don't believe me, it's a New York Times article.
Wow.
Insane, right? I told you, are you ready for a wild ride?
Yeah.
I haven't even talked to you about like the defuncto ventilators they sent us that were malfunctioning.
God, dude. I shouldn't even be laughing about this because this is so serious. But
I mean, it is, but it's so like, what? This is like, it's the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, and that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. And being in the realm that I am with the open minds and stuff, like none of this honestly surprises me, but to hear it from somebody who has the expertise and experience that you have is just like reassuring to me, like, oh my God, like it's something you don't want to be right about, but you just feel it in your gut. You're like, something's wrong. You know what I mean? Something's wrong.
I mean, it's like you're all sitting at home watching the news and everyone's just dropping dead, remember, of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But were they? They were standing in line to go into that hospital.
Yeah.
Like, how are they dropping dead once they're in the hospital? But if you stayed home and got sick, you did just fine. But if you went to the hospital, you died. It's because the mismanagement of the entire disaster situation. I don't know if you can hear my kids like little thumpy feet. So, I mean, yeah, it was the chaos. I mean, really, do you think a gynecologist knows how to manage a respiratory disorder and manage ventilator settings?
Absolutely
they deliver
not.
babies. Yeah.
You
think a podiatrist should be managing a respiratory, outbreak of a pandemic? and managing ventilator settings. Do you think that they know how to do that? No.
Absolutely not.
Do you think like an OB nurse or a school nurse that's like knows how to manage a ventilator? I mean, they had no concept of what nurses and doctors did until then.
Mm-hmm. So how much
Yeah.
prior to this COVID outbreak and this happening that turned your life upside down, how many hours would you estimate that you've had experience in outbreak scenarios?
Um, if you go back to my previous time before I was a nurse and I was a biochemist, I mean, I've thousands of hours of, I mean, because my original research was tracking like the genetic like mutations in the HIV virus into the sub-Saharan 1 and sub-Saharan type 2 type HIV virus. Um, I did that in the Ebola outbreak and the, what was it? I did Zika in Brazil. I mean, I've done a bunch. It wasn't a big deal for me because if you know you have a respirator and N95, you can pretty much handle anything. And then throw some goggles on if you're worried. Like Ebola, I'd probably want goggles, but everything else I didn't wear goggles, just because there's so many body fluids with Ebola. But I mean, thousands of hours, it wasn't that big of a deal. It was actually kind of exciting because I had back-to-back pregnancies. So I'm like, man, I'm back in the game. It's like, before I had kids and I can go rappel out of a helicopter in a foreign country. And then except for I don't have six-pack abs now.
Right.
So it was exciting in the fact that I got to feel my brain again. And be challenged and know how to like work and think on my feet like I did in flight and trauma. But it turned out to be just absolute pandemonium and chaos because people didn't know what they were doing. I mean, we can go into the fact that I took ventilator circuits off dead people and put them on living people, that they cut the cables off the defibrillator monitor so we couldn't defibrillate people because they put that governor put a standing order out that we weren't to resuscitate anyone. And I'm like, no.
Did they give you a reason why they were doing that?
To conserve on resources. You know how Italy was like, if you're over this age, just go home to die, please.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, no, guys, we can do this. And so all of us nurses band together and we're like, no, we're going to revive these people if they go down. And so then the code rate went up because we just stopped listening. Because I mean, I'm gonna code someone who wants to live. It's not our decision. We weren't running out of supplies. They were pumping in so much into that city because I was in NYC.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no management of resources. It kind of reminded me of like Haiti when they would just airdrop a bunch of shit in, but there was no like how you deviled it out or dealed it out. So it became like an actual resource breakdown. And it was just, I mean, they sent us ventilators that didn't work. And you can check this on CNN. They didn't fund the maintenance of the emergency stockpile of ventilators. And then the ventilators are obsolete. So we had no circuits. So that's how I had to reuse circuits. All sorts of things like that happened. I mean, I can't tell you how many times the ventilator itself, because it malfunctioned, killed someone. Or I mean, we can go and talk about how the governor made an order where nursing students and medical students can work as full-fledged nurses and doctors. And then you walk onto a unit and you've got a nurse with 3 semesters of nursing school and no real life experience other than the fact that she worked at Shake Shack before she went to nursing school. And
Jesus.
She can't figure out why the patient is dying and she's running out screaming and crying that her patient's dying. And you walk in there and the ventilator set to 6 breaths per minute. And just for those of you who are not medical, you need to breathe from 12 to 22 in order to survive. And that's why he died, not because of COVID.
And they're marking all these deaths down as COVID deaths.
Yes. Originally, they put me in the trauma bay because I was like a flight nurse and trauma was kind of like what we did. I'm like, I know how to work in, pre-hospital trauma. I don't know how to assume like a trauma bay position around a bed, know what my instinctive responsibilities are. So like I lasted a couple hours down there before they sent me upstairs to like go man some ventilators. And some guy came in dead on arrival with a giant knife in his chest and they put it down as COVID. And I'm like, well, and I'm like, he was dead with a knife in his chest. COVID didn't stab that man. Because it was $39,000 for a ventilator death and $14,000 for a COVID diagnosis. So why not label him as a COVID death?
So they were doing it for money, for funding.
I would have to think so, because why would you put down on his death certificate or on the medical record when you go back into the chart that he died of COVID when the second diagnosis is stab wound?
Right.
because there's medical codes. So your primary diagnosis should be the primary reason for the medical encounter. So if
Hmm.
you came in for diabetes, uncontrolled blood sugar, and then they just happened to find an infected toe that they had to treat too, primary diagnosis would be diabetes.
Hmm.
Second would be infected toe. That's kind of how it works. So his primary diagnosis would have been stab wound. Secondary diagnosis, if he had been alive or swabbed or whatever, could have been COVID. But first diagnosis was COVID. Second diagnosis was stab wound, and that's fraud.
So you're saying, because saw all the headlines that these hospitals are a shortage for supplies and this and that. You're saying they had enough supplies, they were just mismanaged how they were handling them out. And
Yeah, because here's the thing: like all the pumps would end up on one unit. Like
right.
all the IV pumps are here, but we need them down here. Get someone to bring the pumps down to us. Get someone to restock these units, like
And
with all the consumables, and they didn't.
you're talking about the difference of if it's as hectic as you're saying and it's busy as you're saying, I mean, that could be life or death for somebody if you don't have that like within arm's reach, right? Certain
Yeah, and
stuff.
so we had to keep running. Like I had to keep running to different units because we had like a texting chat with like all of us nurses on for that shift, and all shift long be like, who has this, where can I find this, who has turning pillows,
Oh my
like who's got
God.
propofol, we're about to run out. And so we'd be like, over here on this unit I've got that. They're like, if I get off the elevator, can you like throw it to me, because if you leave, who's watching your patients?
Yeah.
um and that's how it is. And I'm like, I had to leave one time to go get some more sedation medication on a different unit. And I was leaving my two ventilated patients with a nurse that had been retired for 20 years.
Hmm.
And her original job was 30 years as a school nurse.
Hmm.
And I'm like, just start compressions if they flatline, because you don't know, she wouldn't know anything else to do.
For the
She'd been
for the
retired for
record,
20 years.
do you know what the qualifications of a school nurse is? I can't imagine it's a lot, but
Well, I mean, I think because I'm not a school nurse, so I don't know. I think you need to have an RN and do school nurse stuff. I really don't know, because see, we're specialized. Other than having the RN, after the RN, you specialize in your discipline. So I'm like, I don't know. Maybe you become certified. I don't know. I don't know. When someone says school nurse, I think it's someone that when you throw up, they give you like a sucker and let you lay down in their office, or you cut your leg, they put a band-aid on. I don't know, because I'm not a school nurse.
well,
I know she's a nurse, but I don't know what
yeah,
she does.
that's what I would imagine is just somebody that knows how to check a temperature and, give over the counter medication.
Yeah, when my husband first met me before I was a flight nurse, he just thought I took care of old people and gave people pills. I'm like, if you're not in that specialty, what do you like? You don't really know. I mean, my husband's a boss mechanic person. I'm like, I don't know. I know he manages people that are mechanic people. I know he does scheduling, and if people call off, they have to call him. I don't really know what he does,
Right. So,
because we're specialized.
right. And that's what I'm trying to compare. So, like, would you think, when you first started being a registered nurse, when you like your first year as a registered nurse, before you had the flight nurse, before you had all that experience, would you be equipped to handle what you dealt with just recently?
Oh, no, I'd probably fucking crying. I mean, it was, it, no, because I could barely hack it working at an old folks home. Like, and those people are gonna die. Like, like I really, I could barely pass all the pills I was supposed to pass during a shift, let alone manage a damn ventilator. I mean, I was taught as a nurse, if you had a vent, like, in school, if you worked in the ICU with the ventilator, you would call RT, and RT would take care of the ventilator.
What is
I remember
RT?
before I was a flight respiratory therapy, I remember like when I was in the ICU, like I didn't even know how to turn the ventilator on to get it ready for like the person coming up. I didn't know how to put it in standby mode. When it beeped, I knew to yell for RT.
That's kind of what I wanted to get a picture of for the audience is like what you're referring to as having a school nurse on an ICU floor during the middle of a pandemic is complete. Uh, it shouldn't be happening. Should not be
Yeah,
happening.
like would you send a police officer into a burning building to put a fire out?
Yeah. Would you send the janitor of your husband's job to come work on a mechanical situation? No.
Right? Would you have your brain surgeon put your leg back on if it got cut off?
Right. Right.
No.
Wow. So take all right. So take me after that video came out and after I mean, you had to have came home after that. What happened?
So I came home and well, instantly, because I mean, I put out that video because I was thinking someone's going to see this video and they're going to come, all the authorities are going to come rushing in and they're going to be like, what are you doing to these people? Stop killing these people. And a big investigation would get launched. Nope. Instantly, as the video went viral in less than 12 hours. And every single nurse, even the ones that worked side by side with me and told and like knew how I nursed and how I ran around helping people and the teamwork that I did and my competency level, all immediately shunned me. And it was my last shift. Like, and then I had to leave because it was actually a threat to like my safety and everything like that. And I get back to the hotel and I had 2 days before my airplane would take off, to go catch my flight. So I had to hide for 2 days. And in 2 days, mind you, this video is going globally viral. Everyone's seen it. It's on the New York Times, and in the New York Post and everywhere across the world. And the staffing agency never bothered to get a hold of me while I'm in the hotel with Central Command for the staffing agency to ask me any questions about this or anything. I did have to talk to a trauma therapist that was there because I'm like, dude, I need to talk to somebody. Nobody believes me, but everyone knows what's happening. Because I had plenty of videos of people telling me all the same stories when you're on the bus and in the break rooms, and they all acted like it didn't happen. So I had to sneak out of New York because everyone's like, she's going to be found dead in a dumpster. They're going to kill her. And I'm like, she's a liar. She's a fame seeker. She's not a real nurse. I'm a paid crisis actor, paid for by the Democrats. And I'm like, what are you people doing? Like, what are you even talking about? People didn't even know that as a nurse, our licenses, just like doctors, are public knowledge. You can verify my credentials at the Nevada State Board of Nursing. And I'm like, what are you people even doing? And then I find out that there's pictures of my children and our family photos being circulated all around the country and all
Oh
around the
my
world.
God.
And I'm like, oh my God, there's like child traffickers. They're coming after our kids. The house is going to get broken into, which it did. And I'm just completely psychologically broken at this point because even at home, everyone turned against me. All the nurses I'd worked with for a decade, all the nurses that I trained from like little student nurses up into full-fledged nurses on, all called me liars. People who said that they worked with me back home I'm like, I have no clue who you are. Her telling everyone I'm a liar and oh my gosh, I know her. She's just drama. And I'm like, wow. And I get home and literally it was to the point where if I walked down a grocery aisle and saw one of them, they would just turn their back on me. I'm like, what? Are we mean girls type stuff? And it took like such a psychological hit. So I leave, I even got off the elevator and one guy from the first hospital, a nurse that I worked with, he's like, hey, you might want to disguise yourself, wear a mask and a hat and something because everyone's looking for you. There's news reporters outside looking for you. And I'm like, oh shit. And I'm like, because I'm just a normal person. I have a 4-month-old and a 1-year-old. I go to work, I go to school, I have a husband, I mow the yard, I do dishes. I'm not some person that goes out in the world and is famous or anything like that. I mean, it was so bad that when I get into my Uber to go to the airport, the Uber driver's like, did you hear about that nurse from Nevada who was telling everyone that they've murdered people? I thought something was up because no one was dying that I saw. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, what, is he going to shoot me or kill me? Like, I don't even know. It was that scary. And then I think the way that the planes work, I ended up with an hour late, an overnight layover in San Francisco. People, they somehow found out where where my next plane was, and there were reporters looking for me, and I had to barricade myself in the janitor closet, and I slept in the janitor closet to hide from the media people. And then I got on, I got dropped off in Salt Lake from that flight. My husband reached there, and I just had a complete mental breakdown. And then I get home to find out that everyone hates me, and I'm like, oh my God, what just happened here? Fox News, CNN, foreign news outlets are trying to get a hold of us. They're trying to get a hold of my husband and our cousins and our uncle and aunts. And I'm like, it was the most insane thing I had ever seen in my life and gone through. And I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think I was gonna make it through because like the mental anguish, it's like my brain broke. And like, I mean, who do you call when you're going through something like that? No one, because they all abandoned you. And I'm like, I couldn't even pick my kids up from daycare without getting a sideways glance from the other nurses that sent their same kids to that daycare. You know, I became like a leper or something like that. And then a year later, we all realized that, yeah, why are they all dying? And I've just been trying to save lives ever since.
So did you ever get a chance or an opportunity to ask these nurses that you work by, whether it be at home or over to different states, why they did what they did by not backing you up or shunning you, or what were they told that they just didn't speak out, or at least say, hey, we appreciate you speaking out even though we're not going to? Did you ever get a chance to talk to anybody about that?
No, some of the people that like still were good with me afterwards, they wouldn't say anything. Like my lead, I mean, he has like letters that a patient wrote about how they were trying to kill him, and on his cell phone. I mean, I remember seeing like, oh my God, he's got all the videos. They didn't want to deal with what I went through, having to deal with the FBI, the Department of Justice, having to talk to the President of the United States of America, things like that, people breaking into your house. I mean, I'll have to send you the text message. One girl that worked side by side with me every day for like 2 weeks. And she's like, can you not talk? Can you just never contact me again? I'm afraid for the safety of my family. I'm like, whoa. So when I went down, I just had to go down on my own because I wasn't going to bring anyone down with me. I'm not going to be like, oh, here's this person, this person, this person, and here's their phone number. They'll
Right,
corroborate my story. Because what? So they can go after them? So they can
right.
go through what I'm going through?
So you
So
ended
my
up,
job, yeah. So my job's to protect other people. I protected all of them too. But they know what
yes.
happened. I mean, some of them still get a hold of me from time to time to tell me I'm doing a good job fighting this COVID pandemic and saving lives.
Mhm.
It's insane.
So you ended up becoming a martyr for what the mainstream media's agenda is, pretty much.
Yeah. So now you see all these, and then other nurses came forward too, but it wasn't a big deal. I mean, look at all the other nurses. You've got Jennifer Bridges from the Methodist nurses and Methodist Hospital that did the vaccine mandate walkout. Okay.
Mm.
You've got, who is it? Jodi OMalley with the whole undercover thing with Project VR test that just came out about how they're killing people with that. And I'm like, we already know that it's like a 90% mortality rate once you put people on a ventilator. I mean, and then the data comes out that less than 1% of the population is dying from COVID, and the flu goes away. Nobody dies of cancer. Heart disease is the number one killer of Americans, but now it's COVID. And then people started to put the puzzle pieces together. But by then, the damage for my life was already done. And the damage for, my family's life was already done. And you just had to pick up the pieces from there. I mean, I'm unemployable. I tried to take a nurse contract job to an epicenter once.
Hmm.
It was actually just reasonably recently. I had a name badge on for one shift and I was out the next morning because
Wow.
they realized who I was. I mean, I literally am going to have to change my name if I want to actually have a real job like a grown up again.
Yeah.
So it's pretty insane. And since then, I'm like, I looked at it this way. I told my husband, I'm like, I'm already out there. There's nothing that can be done to salvage my career or whatever. I can't get a job anywhere. I can't get a job in my own town. Damn it. I'm like, I'm not even joking about that. They literally they were begging for staff with the emergency response people, because I'm part of like the emergency response staffing for Nevada.
Hmm.
And they're like, we need people, anyone that can manage a ventilator. And I told my husband, I'm like, watch, I'll apply. And I'm like, I apply to go work for free in my own
Hmm.
hometown hospital. And they're like, no, thank you.
Unreal.
I mean, I guess we're not in a pandemic. If you can decline the most qualified nurse to manage these ventilators. I mean, I've managed up to 7 ventilators at one time, kept them all alive. Probably not the best quality of care, but I kept them all alive when no one else could. 7 ventilators all at once. That's a super human feat.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's just been insane. So I told my husband, I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to save some lives. So I started American Frontline Nurses. And we started a podcast to tell everybody about what's
Hey,
going on across the world. And we reach about 1 million people a month across 25 countries. And I'm the #1 most sought after COVID expert, second only to, I think, the FLCCC, Dr. Pierre Corey's group,
right.
and things like that. So people literally will pay me to go fix their COVID problems in their country, like India did. And I mean, they're not dying. Like only in America, Canada, the UK, and Australia are they dying like this. COVID doesn't exist in Egypt. COVID doesn't exist in Pakistan. COVID doesn't exist in India anymore.
So is it true that like COVID is part of the flu family, right? Or the common cold, like coronaviruses in general?
Well, how I kind of explain this, because having been a biochemist and taught like virology and epidemiology and things like that, is it's like a cat and dog. They're both mammals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one's a cat, one's a dog. They all have fur, they all have legs, they all have fangs, they all have whiskers, they all have ears, they all have tails. So yeah, they're part of the mammals, but a cat's a cat and a dog's a dog.
Right.
Coronavirus and the flu virus, influenza. Because I also worked on research for the 1918 influenza, reconstructing the actual viral genome on that. It's the flu is the flu, and coronavirus is coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
So it belongs to the family of like coronavirus that, yes, has some overlapping similar symptoms to the flu, but it's not. I mean, the entire structure is completely different. Just like, I don't know, we have different genitals. I'm like, duh, I'm a woman.
Right.
Can you tell? Like, you should know better. Like, so if you're a virologist, it's like, come on, duh. So it's like that. So yes, typical coronaviruses just cause like runny noses. That's it. Kids get them all the time. If you ever see kids with that like goopy runny nose, my kids have one right now. They
Mm-hmm.
always have a runny nose. They probably picked up the coronavirus. This is why moms don't die at the same frequency that men do. So women of like childbearing age with small children typically are the lower demographic for hospitalization and mortality, is because they're the primary caregivers for small children and have cross immunity from traditional coronaviruses.
Mm-hmm. So what the reason I
Science.
the reason I bring that up is because I've heard some doctors on the internet, and this is the internet, so please correct me if I'm wrong, talk about how you'll never get rid of the coronavirus because it has animal reservoirs. Is there truth to that?
Well, I think, well, I'm trying to think if vector or reservoir is the better term.
Mm-hmm.
Vector is the mode is the organism for transport.
Mm-hmm.
Reservoir is literally the reservoir. Yeah, well, yeah, because, well, we're never going to get rid of it because it's out in the wild. It's going to learn to coexist with us. Either it's going to wipe us out or it's going to learn to coexist with us. And if there's anything that we have learned in epidemiology, is that it's theoretically how it should work, is it should learn to live with us in harmony. The first wave should get the weak, the old, the fragile, and things like that. The second wave will then get anyone without any prior immunity. And that would be your 20 to 50-year-old range. That's typically how it works in epidemiology when the second wave comes, because technically right now is the second wave. But no, it's out there. It's out there. It doesn't matter if it was made in the lab. It doesn't matter if this was natural. It's out there. Okay. Because I mean, you can speculate whatever you want about gain of function and whatever. And I'm like, that's someone else's responsibility. I'm just going to try and save the life in front of me.
Right.
And but no, it is never going away. You will never eradicate COVID. You never eradicated polio either, just by the way, if you guys don't know
Right.
about that.
That's good. I'm glad you bring up that point. So you're basically now you're in a position of like consulting.
Um, yeah, and I mean, when we're not recording like the actual screen, maybe when we get off, I'll just open up my Facebook Messenger or my email or whatever. I mean, how many missed text messages do I have just right now? Because we've been on this podcast 83, just
Wow.
in the short time that we've been on. And people are just like, please, I need help. My family member's about to be put on a ventilator. They're killing my family member. Please help my son. My wife's dying. They just keep sending them home. They can't breathe. And I'm like, then they need to, and then once you're in the hospital, they lock your family away. They won't tell
Mhm.
your family what's going on. They won't listen to you. They won't give you appropriate medications. I mean, I've had to get court orders to force hospitals to feed people. And mind you, these people aren't on a ventilator. They're sitting up saying, I'm hungry, feed me. I haven't eaten in 6 days.
So they're
And they're on
speaking, they're aware, they're up,
they're aware. They
cognitive.
take themselves to the potty. Okay.
Wow.
They walk to the potty.
Wow.
I have had to Uber food to people in the hospital.
That's
I
disgusting.
mean, what is going on here? I mean, granted, there are a time where you may not be able to eat like for a few days because of some medical reason, bowel rest or pancreatitis, or I mean, it's reasonably, acceptable from a medical standpoint not to tube feed somebody on a ventilator for 48 hours, 72 hours to prevent aspiration pneumonia while we're decompressing your stomach. Most Americans have enough fat stores, but here's the thing is that once you let them go for too long, they go into decay. You know, because most people are diabetics. Your ketone levels go up. I mean, you break down your fat and your muscles as fuel sources. You start to end up with brittle bone issues because your body is leaching the potassium or leaching the calcium and phosphorus out of your bones. I mean, there are a lot of issues with not feeding someone. They're not
Yeah.
turning them half the time. They don't get range of motion. They're just strapped to a bed there. I mean, and then the weird thing is they put rectal tubes in everybody. And I'm like, why are you putting rectal tubes in people? They're on fentanyl. It's a narcotic. They're going to be constipated. You can't poop
Yeah.
like a dry, hard poop through a tube. What are you
Not gonna
doing?
work. Yeah.
No. And then so you end up with perforated bowels. And I'm like,
Wow.
what are you people doing? I mean, we can't even get them to give vitamin C in a hospital. I mean, these aren't hospitals anymore. These are the new gas chambers. I mean, anyone that's
Holy
had a
fuck.
patient in the hospital for COVID, ask if it was a pleasant experience or if you felt safe for your loved one. We haven't even reached like January where I went to the Capitol, and then I come back and the FBI show up at my door and I'm like, what is y'all don't even know what it's like yet until the feds roll up at your house and you
So
think they're going to put a bag on your head.
I feel super blessed because we're out in North Dakota. I'm from California, but we're out in North Dakota. I moved out here about 8 years ago for work.
Oh,
Um,
I was going to say, did you flee California?
I did about 8 years ago, and my wife had our youngest daughter in the middle of COVID. It was July of last year. We're fortunate enough they made her test when she went in there to have the baby, but they allowed me to be in there and all that stuff, and they
Oh,
weren't too
that's
strict.
good.
Yeah, but we heard horror stories of what you just said about babies being taken from the mothers. The dads weren't even allowed in the rooms when they're delivering. It's like I can't even imagine how that would be for the mom to give delivery without her partner by there, you know?
Yeah, but we could have the Grammys and the Oscars and football games, but you, the mom can't go into the NICU, dad can't come in to be there. What?
So you said you've had COVID 5 times now since the start of this.
Hmm.
How did you treat
Yeah.
it? What'd you do?
Um, the first time when I came back from New York, I don't even know how I picked it up, and I actually didn't even realize I had it until we were going to the zoo, and
Mhm.
we were in the car, and I'm like, my husband's like, you can't even smell like the kids with dirty diapers, and I'm like, no, and I'm like, oh my god, did I catch COVID? Because now you're worried that was I around old people, because that was who was dying during then. Oh, thank you. And I didn't even know I had caught it. I mean, I was feeling a little worn down, but I'm like, shoot, I'm saving the world. And so I didn't even realize that I had COVID. And then I caught it a couple other times being at different epicenters. And by then we knew about ivermectin. So you just take your dose of ivermectin. Oh, thank you. And took one dose and I'd be fine. I mean, now I have so many antibodies, it probably wouldn't even affect me. But if I catch COVID, I take 3 days worth of my ivermectin dosing. Oh, thank you. And that way I can't transmit it to anybody and I don't have any issues. I think I have more issues with being dehydrated all the time than I do with COVID.
So how
So
do you, if you're allowed to speak on this, how do you get a hold of ivermectin if because I know some hospitals aren't giving it out. or they're
Oh, no
not
hospitals are giving it out without a lawsuit.
right, or they're not treating you with it if you're not vaccinated or stuff like that. So
No, they just don't treat you if you're not vaccinated. They tell you to come back until you need a vet. So yeah, there's actually it's more or less freedom-minded doctors that will prescribe hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, and we have like an entire underground network that of doctors that will prescribe ivermectin because we have to keep them off the radar, or they'll get reported to their medical boards because nowhere in all 50 states. Did you get that? Is there any restriction for any nurse practitioner, doctor, or physician assistant to prescribe ivermectin for COVID? There's no restriction anywhere. Or any pharmacist to fill it. Oh, except for just recently in the past 2 weeks, Louisiana, they can't prescribe it.
really,
So they just, yeah. So if you ask a doctor, why won't you prescribe ivermectin to me? They're going to tell you two things. It's not the protocol. I'll lose my license. I absolutely guarantee you. Find any doctor, any primary care, any hospitalist that treats a COVID patient and ask, hey, do you write prescriptions for ivermectin for your patients to treat COVID? And the first thing they're going to say is that's a horse medicine, which is not true. Because it won a Nobel Prize for human medicine. And we've been using it for 70 years. And then they're going to say it's not the protocol. That's the favorite phrase. It's not the protocol.
mm-hmm.
Can you help her up? She's like stuck right there. And then the second thing that they're going to say is I'll lose my license if I do that.
Which is true or not true?
Not true. Except for maybe in Louisiana now as of 2 weeks ago.
Did they try to come after your license?
Yeah, they file a lot of complaints and everything like that, but nothing sticks because I actually didn't do anything wrong. I mean, yeah. I don't know if people know this. You can't file a complaint with the State Board of Nursing because you think I'm a bitch.
Right.
I'm like, or you don't like me.
So how did you, how do you fight that though? Because I'm sure they threatened you and tried to say the same thing that these doctors, like you just said, how, oh, I'll lose my license. I'm sure they said, we're going to revoke it. We're going to take it.
You know who actually reports like me to the State Board of Nursing is, is the nurses in my own town. And I think, yeah, the nurses in my own town, they actually like were trying to start a petition to get my nursing license taken when I came back from New York. And then like trolls, I guess you can say, like there was an anonymous complaint from Australia. Like I haven't been to Australia in 25 years. Or what was Canada. There's some, it's really bad in Canada right now, but there was like 3 Canadian complaints. And the State Board's like, what's going on with you people? Like, she doesn't, like, even if I was in Canada, like, and I chopped your arm off or something like that as a nurse, you can't go back to the Nevada State Board of Nursing and be like, file a complaint there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, or they'll like, oh, you know what? She said this on her podcast and she posted this on her social media. And I'm like, yeah, it's all public. Go ahead. The State Board of Nursing people follow me.
So you still have your nurse's license, but you're just not employed because nobody will employ you.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, you can Google my name. What's going to come up? It's going to be a lot of stuff.
Right.
I mean, nothing bad, but it's going to be like, an interview here, a podcast there, being on a news show or a talk show, or, a news article about what like Brazil or India, or, when I was at a freedom rally, or me being in DC, me talking with the president or something like that, me being down there for the border crisis, things like that. I mean, I guess you're a quack if you want to save a life. I mean,
that's what blows. That's what blows my mind is that, no offense, but even if you are drama, you are a bitch, whatever, there's a group of people that took you have to take an oath to be a nurse.
We take what's called the Nightingale Pledge, and you can Google it. It's a standardized pledge, at least in the United States that I'm aware of, but it's optional. And the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take, it's optional as well. So only, I think, 20% of doctors actually take the Hippocratic Oath.
Wow.
So the oath is optional.
But you didn't
become my oath.
Nurses don't become nurses because of the scenery, right?
Oh no. I mean, do you know how many times I've been punched and kicked and spit on and groped? How many times I've had to have my hand up someone's butt to extract something? I've had people throw up on me. I've had people piss on me. I mean, I can't even tell you the amount of times I've come home with bruises or a chunk of my hair missing or a complete breakdown from like the despair that you see, you know, with human suffering. Like it's not that great of a paycheck. I could go sell Etsy stuff and make and have a better psychological mindset. You go into nursing because it's a calling, because you want to help people. Ask any nurse the first thing that they'll tell you when you ask them, why do you want to become a nurse? I absolutely guarantee you they will say, because I wanted to help someone. I wanted to help people.
So why didn't they help you? That's what I was getting at. Regardless of somebody's personal preference to somebody, when you see bodies stacked up in a hallway and the only way you can label them is by writing on their legs with a Sharpie of their name and their date of birth, and you have the courage and the balls to be like, this is wrong. I just can't wrap my head
Well,
around that.
here's the thing is when you see what happened to me, because like that video was like a nuclear explosion. The nuclear explosion destroyed everything kind of like in my life. And then
Mhm.
it was like the radiation fallout was affecting everyone else. People showed up at my husband's grandmother's home in Reno. They were getting a hold of all of my family members. I mean, it's like people had to distance themselves from me so they wouldn't get swept away in the radioactive like fallout. And then it's like, well, I'm not going to come forward because look what happened to her. You know, she can't even get a job anymore. Like, you know, when you're someone that you have to work to put food on the table, to keep shelter over your head, you know, we don't have the luxury of, I mean, of just like having endless amounts of money. I mean, we had to sell our house. Like, I had a brand new house. You know, I mean, my car's been vandalized. I mean, our old house was broken into 3 times. And I mean, I can't tell you, like, and people are like, well, why aren't other people coming forward? I'm like, wow, you just called me a crisis actor and you hoped I fucking died. Yeah, that really inspires more people to come forward and tell the truth.
Right.
I mean, because every other nurse, all these other doctors can see what is happening, what people are posting about me on social media. So do you really think they're going to come forward with what they see is going on when that's how it's being received?
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I'd be afraid too.
And I totally understand somebody with a family not publicly wanting to do it, but I mean, you would think people that you worked with side by side would at least be like, you know what? Thank you. Thank you for doing that. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna slam you, but thank you, you know?
Oh
Instead, these
yeah,
people just turn
it's
their back on you and
bad.
is like shun you. Also, you know, you might have kind of been one of the first major ones to come out. You think that might have something to do with it too, though, because it was kind of like a
Yeah.
nuclear explosion.
Yeah. And then after that, like big bomb goes off, and then other people start to come forward.
Hmm.
And it's like, it wasn't as big of a deal. Like when you're the first, it's kind of a big deal. And I think that's kind of was the issue now. It's just like, I mean, there's a nurse, Jodi OMalley, who came out about like the whole thing with, you know, the vaccine. And they knew in Arizona that it was killing people. I mean, she has a $500,000 GoFundMe.
Yeah, I saw
Like,
that on Project Virdis or whatever.
yeah, it's up to like 500,000 now. And I mean, good for her because she's a single mom. I talked with her, but I'm just like, wow. I mean, I mean, with me, people just threw like bricks through my window. Like,
Jesus.
I mean, I can laugh at it at now, but before it was psychologically like devastating.
I couldn't imagine. And I mean, just like you said, it's got to be hard on your husband, your immediate outside family, your kids. I mean, that's just terrible.
It was pretty bad. I would have really bad panic attacks just going out to go like store. I had to like be reintroduced. I could say, I'm like, I would tell my husband, I'm like, can we just do a test run to the grocery store and get some bananas? And we go in, get bananas, and go right to the cash register. And I would have a panic attack, you know, and I'm like, I need to leave. I have to go to the car right now. And like a week or so later, I came across this attorney who got a hold of me and she's like, hi, my name is Rachel Abramovitz, and I know what's going on in those hospitals. I have hundreds of families getting a hold of me telling me what's going on in these hospitals. And she listed several examples. I'm like, oh my God, those are things I didn't even say in my video, but
Hmm.
I've seen. And so I've been working with her, you know, for 18 months now, um, trying to save these people and expose what's going on. So honestly, I tell everyone she saved my life, because I don't know what would have happened to me from a psychological standpoint. I mean, I probably would have committed suicide or something, because my whole everything just broke
I can't
that the day
imagine.
that video went viral. So yeah, and you just have to pick yourself up, and you have to recreate a new path in this new chaos to help people. And so that's how I ended up starting American Frontline Nurses and the Ask Nurses podcast. I know I have hundreds of people who want to work with me, to the point that we actually are like, well, we need the best of the best now. And we're starting the advocacy network. We've started writing a book series. We have a huge documentary series coming out. And you create the new future, and you continue to help people. And we're kind of the primary source for advocating for people, not only for COVID. Like, my specialty is the advocacy and management of COVID, but we have people who are specialized in medical kidnapping. We have people who are specialized in vaccine mandates. We have people who are specialized with Veterans Affairs issues. And things like that. And so we have multiple specialties for advocacy. It's not just COVID. I just happen to be the COVID person. And
Right.
that's just the buzz right now. But I mean, what do you do when they take your baby because you test positive for COVID and they won't let you have your baby back? Like, literally, they tell you to come back in 2 weeks
Fuck
and get your
that.
baby,
Fuck that.
right? What do you do? What do you do?
I'd be in
Someone
jail.
says, we're exactly. So you've got a mom who they just like did an emergency C-section on. How are you going to fight back when you're psychologically devastated and breaking
Hmm.
because they stole your baby from you,
Yeah.
right?
You
Who do you
can't.
call? Not Ghostbusters. You call one of us and we fight for you. I mean, I had a case this week, Tuesday or Wednesday. The family, it was a Hispanic family, and they get a hold of me on the phone and they're like, Nicole, the doctor walked in and he said that he made our family member a DNR. And I'm like, no, he can't legally do that. We told him that only Jesus can make him a DNR. He wants to live. And I'm like, okay, give me a second. And 15 minutes, like, mind you, the state that they're at, it's like 4:45. And I'm trying to scramble to find an attorney with a Google search in a state I have never worked with. And I am like putting up a Hail Mary. And I'm just like, you know what? Guerrilla tactics. I put up one social media post with all the phone numbers to this hospital. And I'm like, everyone call this hospital, blow their phones up. And I've tracked down an attorney and I'm like, I need you to get over there. Please help me. I need to help this family. And the guy is like on his way home to go see his family. And he's like, I will turn around right now and I will go to that hospital right now. And then I have to call the police and I get a hold of the CEO all in 15 minutes. And then the doctor walks in at 20 minutes later and says, he's a full code now. I'm sorry that I did that, and walks out.
What a piece of
And I did
shit,
that.
dude.
Exactly. He doesn't have the authority to make that decision, but
Hmm.
they didn't want to have to code him. And I'm just like, no, because they'll try and coerce you to turn the machines off, and they'll coerce you to make him a DNR. My favorite is, we'll let you come visit if you make them a DNR.
How
I
does
mean, it's like
that,
you, if you had, yeah, right? How does
how,
that happen?
well, and okay, so for anybody who doesn't know, DNRs do not resuscitate, but how does that morally, because there's a difference. Okay, how does that morally affect somebody? There's a difference between you in the right heart and place of mind, really wanting to try to help people, but I'm sure there's laws that the hospitals and places that you worked for pushed on you where you had to like legally let people go, we'll say, but it's really killing them. And then
Mm.
somebody like that doctor who is just like, I don't want to do it. Like, how do you go home and sleep at night?
Knowing that you made your paycheck, I guess, really good because you still have your home.
But I mean, like, even
That's
for
what I
you
don't get. That's what I don't get. That's the $1,000,000 question.
being in the right place, like doing the right thing from your heart, but a hospital is like, okay, you have to cut the plug on this guy. How do you mentally bring yourself to that place?
And this is why everyone was committing suicide and why everyone is leaving the nursing profession. And here's how you can tell. Go look at the job openings at a hospital or a facility or a medical place. See how many job openings there are. They are leaving healthcare in droves. And I'm not just talking nurses, doctors, respiratory therapists, phlebotomists, radiology techs. They're just abandoning their careers. I mean, you know what I honestly thought about doing? even though I could probably change my name and take a nurse crisis job and get paid $150 an hour, like $10,000 a week, I told my husband, I'm like, hey, do you know Napa's paying $18 an hour to go run parts? I bet you that'd be really cool because I just have to drop off parts and I can listen to audiobooks and no one's going to die. And he's like, yeah, I think that's a good idea. That's super low stress. Do you know I have a nurse friend who went and got a job at Barnes and Noble. She's like, I like my job so much better. No one dies. No one's screaming at me. No one's threatening to fire me. And I'm just like, yeah, they would rather go work as a waitress. I know a nurse that's working as a waitress. She's like, I'd rather do that because it's like, oh, you didn't want tomatoes on that, but did you die? And I'm talking, they've got 20 years and a doctorate in nursing, and they would much rather go be a waitress at Denny's.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're leaving in droves. They're just, if you ask them, why did you leave nursing? Why did you leave the bedside? Why did you do this? They'll tell you, this is not healthcare. This is sick care. You know, the healthcare industry is ran by profits and pharma. And our job is to save lives, right?
Right.
And the ones that haven't left are either holding on for retirement or they don't have an escape route yet. But ask anyone. I mean, the people that referred you to me, I'm like, ask her, why are they picking up and moving states?
Yeah.
Because she doesn't like her job.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't like it either. If I, you know, when you tell me what you're going through, I wouldn't like that either.
Yeah.
So they all see what's going on, but it's like, how do you fix it all? The system is so complex, and now we have COVID culture on top of it. I mean, medical negligence was the third leading killer in the United States. And I mean, you thought once you add a pandemic on it, it would get better. No, it just got
100 times
exponentially
worse. Yeah. And
exactly. And you have seen it.
that's it sounds like the work that you're doing now is kind of like the total package. It's like not only medical advice and expertise, but it's legal.
Yeah, we partner with a lot of attorneys across the country with multiple different legal specialties.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had a situation, we use Ralph Larigo a lot. He's the only attorney in the country who's fighting COVID cases to force hospitals to give ivermectin. We won a case with the Sugarland Hospital in Texas. Sugarland Hospital like defied the court order and refused to give ivermectin. The patient died. Now it's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Exactly. So here's the thing: it's hard to file medical malpractice in the state of Texas, but it's not hard to sue someone for failing to follow a court order. You know, and so we had a huge law firm offer completely for free to take on that healthcare system.
Wow.
For the family. I mean, I'm not involved with like all of that because my initial part was the COVID, and then we find them the new attorneys for the lawsuit. And then, you know, I mean, it may be years, but it's a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. I mean, we had a situation where there's a state where you can't sue for anything COVID related. For hospitals or anything like that. If COVID is on that diagnosis, you could chop their arm off, you know, shoot them with a gun in the head, and you can't sue for any reason.
Anybody with half a brain should know that that's just red flags right there. Red flags.
Right?
Red flag.
But like, here's the thing is that they killed this one patient. He happened to be a doctor, you know, with their horrible protocols. But I'm like, you know what? You can't sue because he was a COVID patient. But I bet you, because he was a doctor in that town, I bet you a bunch of people illegally accessed his medical records at that hospital, and you can get them for HIPAA. Boom, dysfunctional workaround. And that's what that lawsuit is going for now.
Damn.
Yeah. So then we have to help the families find that attorney. And it's just like right now, we have a Florida kindergarten teacher who's on a ventilator, and we raised money to pay for the attorney fees to force the hospital to give ivermectin. In the meantime, the hospital blew a hole in her lung, and now she's deteriorating even faster. Now we have to find a new hospital to put her on ECMO.
Well, let me guess. Nothing to question there, right?
Nope. Because we went to bed at like midnight, checked her last set of labs because it's the East Coast and I'm on the West Coast. And I'm talking with the husband. I'm like, everything looks good, but don't let your guard down. Something crazy can happen. And I guess always in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even joking you. She blows a pneumo, and they got to put a chest tube, and she's crashing. And, you know, we find this out 10 a.m. the next morning. Why didn't you tell us then?
Yeah.
You know, and now we can't keep the pressures up as high as we need to on the ventilator because now she has a pneumo. And I'm like, she needs ECMO now. we need to find an ECMO bed. And here's the thing, someone needs to die for that bed to free up.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the reality of the situation. We're praying for an open bed, which means we pray that someone either lives or dies very quickly here in the next couple of days
Wow.
before she dies. I mean, and that's what we've come to. But we could have gotten her better without even needing ECMO had they done the ventilator changing, like settings, changed them, like I instructed them to do as like, because I'm acting as a consultant for this husband who's trying to fight for his wife in this hospital.
Right.
And they didn't make the vent settings. And I had told them the previous night, like, you need to make these vent change settings and lower this pressure to this and this setting to this, because what's going to happen is she's going to blow a pneumo. They said, okay, we'll do that. I'm like, okay, I want that documented that you stated you would do this. And he didn't do it. Sure enough, 5 hours later in the middle of the night, she blows a pneumo. And I'm like, I told you this was going to happen. And I'm like, I've seen it thousands of times. I mean, if you've seen something thousands of times, you should know what works and doesn't work, right? It's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different response.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you brought up the financial part, because that was going to be my next question is, do you guys help with certain cases financially? So I think that's cool that you do that.
We do if we have money, but it's just,
Right.
there's more money. I mean, but I could only come up, it was Wednesday night at 2 a.m. My son had actually woken up. He needed to go potty and I couldn't go back to sleep. And I checked my phone and the spouse is like, I sold off this, and this. And he's like, I could only get $2,500. And I'm like, let me go check my organization's bank account. And my husband manages the finances. I'm like, husband, wake up, what's in the account? He's like, I don't know, go check. I'm like, I don't even know how to check. 2:30 in the morning, I'm checking the account and I'm like, oh my God, we have $2,514 and we needed $5,000. And I wired him the money and boom, the next morning we had the attorney and the attorney was already on the hospital. But by then she threw a pneumo. And I mean, like, we had one day, made contact, filed the paperwork. He was going to make contact the next day. And during that night, which was last night, pneumo. And the attorney made contact with the hospital today. Now the attorney's like, I don't know if we need to go after this hospital or the future hospital. You need to tell me which hospital I need to go after. Now we're in this dilemma. What do we do?
Yeah.
And the poor husband is like, I don't know what to do. What hospital do we go after? And I'm like, and then you got to brainstorm and, figure out.
You got to pick and choose your battles. Yeah. Like, which one is going to be the easy route?
Because if will she die? Like, if we say, no, don't go after this hospital and it takes 3 weeks to get an ECMO bed and we're wasting 3 weeks when we could have already been filed the lawsuit, gone to court, started the first dose of ivermectin, or what if we go after the future hospital that we know she's going to and then they decline her for ECMO?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm like, just do this hospital here and we'll worry about tomorrow when it comes.
Yeah. So take me back to January in the FBI. What events led up to that? I'm interested to hear about that.
That's like really interesting. So I guess there was this whole thing called Stop the Steal going on. And I'm not even a political person. Like, I mean, I watch like healthcare legislative stuff going on. But so January 5th, we had gone to DC, me and a bunch of other nurses, to talk about the COVID situation. Why I got invited to the White House to explain what was going on. Please pass this and this legislation, because Trump was like pushing stuff through like before he was like whatever out or whatever. And I personally don't give a shit who you vote for. I can't stand any of them, period.
Right.
Pick the lesser of the two evils, And so then the next morning on the 6th, we were supposed to go down to, it was like a block away from the Capitol.
Uh-huh.
And we were talking about, we're there with a whole bunch of other healthcare professionals talking about the COVID crisis and the mismanagement of patients and all these things that were going on in healthcare. And these buses just pull up and I'm like, they look like some weird Burning Man hillbilly homeless buses. And they just pick up the gates and they move it like aside to let all these buses in. And mind you, like the whole area is surrounded by police. And I'm like, who are these people? This is super weird. These people look like homeless bums. And then they're like, as we're standing there by the porta potties, like trying to go potty, because there's only 3 porta potties, and these guys start unloading out of these buses. And I'm like, oh, hell no. I've seen this before. I have seen this in foreign countries. This is like, shit's about to hit the fan. And I'm like, so I start calling 911 and I tell the other nurses, we need to go. We need to go now. And they're like, oh no, there's police here, there's security. I'm like, if you haven't seen, there are movable barricades around this Capitol, and there are 20 people guarding this Capitol, and 10 of them are EMS. And they start putting on all this like weird ass tactical gear. And I'm like, is this a militia? What's going on here? And so I called 911 like 5 times. I'm like, dude, I think Antifa's here. I think Antifa's here. And they start putting on like Trump shirts and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, because at the Capitol, it was just all these old people in their recliners. They were in like their little lawn chairs, and they had like little wagons with like soda pop and chips and stuff. And I'm like, what the fuck is like, what? Really, like I was gravely confused because I'm like, oh my God, if these guys decide to do anything, these old people can't get up fast enough and like escape. There'll be like a stampede and I don't know, get crushed, or someone's going to knock grandma down and grandma's going to break a hip. And so I called 911 5 times, and each time they're like, ma'am, there's security there. And I'm like, ma'am, you don't understand. There's like 60 dudes here and a bunch of old people. Like, what are you going to do if one of them takes a fucking baton to one of these old people's heads? I mean, come on. These guys are not here, I don't know,
peacefully
to have a picnic.
Right.
Yeah, they are not here to have a picnic when they're like getting their batons ready, like you see in those tactical stores. Or, I mean, why are they putting on Kevlar? Like, what's going on here? And so then I call like 5 times, and they're like, you keep getting a dispatcher. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. And so I'm just like, okay, need to leave nurses. So we go back to the hotel, and I'm sitting there watching on the news, and these guys start breaking everything. And I'm like, what is going on? And then the weird thing is the police started helping the old people off the lawn. They help them, they like literally, like it was all these like SWAT guys, like legit SWAT guys. And you see them pulling their little radio flyers and their little like, and they're carrying lawn chairs, and grandma's with her walker.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, we're in the twilight zone. In the meantime, you've got these guys over here unloading like they're gonna fuck some stuff up. And then we get back to the hotel, and the entire city goes into lockdown. And I'm like,
you found yourself in the middle of the insurrection.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, we were like 5 blocks away in a hotel, and all the nurses are freaking out. They're like, oh my God, are we going to die? What if because they're thinking it's going to be like what happened in New York with the BLM people, and they're going to just start burning the hotels down. And I'm like, well, they burn the hotels down, they'd have to shut the water off first. These guys aren't that smart. I'm a biochemist. I can make contact explosives, have the cleaning products. Let's go raid the snack bar, and we're going to hunker down. We barricaded all the furniture against the windows and doors. And I'm like, let's watch the news and have a frappuccino. We were lucky when the other nurses were coming, they came in a second Uber. I'm like, grab pizza. They're going to lock us down. So they grabbed the pizza, and we're sitting there drinking like cold pressed like coffee, because that was the only thing we could find. Mm-hmm. And eating pepperoni pizza, watching the insurrection on the news. And like, we've got the couches pushed up against the thing, like the windows. Unreal. We've got tables against the door, and the nurses are like, we're gonna die. We're gonna die. I'm like, we're not gonna fucking die. You're fine. I'm like, y'all haven't even been to Syria.
So how long did it take before the FBI contacted you?
So it was interesting because that was the 6th. We all left the 7th, and I swear it was the first week of February. We had just like moved into the new house, because we sold the old house, moved into the new house, and someone knocks on the door, and I thought it was the people that were going to come install the new security camera system at the new house. And I opened up the door, and bam, it's this guy in a jacket with a hat that says FBI, and there's like that big old black sedan outside, and I'm like, fuck, I'm going to jail. Because I'm like, I don't even know, because like the very next day, as we're loading, we're all like separating to the airports. And by the way, the bomb sniffing dogs are out, and SWAT teams are out at the airports. And I'm like, y'all showing up now? Y'all are showing up now.
Yeah.
And so it's all on the news, conspiracy theory nurses like talking about COVID, blah, blah, blah. And I guess we were.
I didn't even see that.
Oh, yeah.
That's how blinded.
By Vice.
Huh.
It's by Vice. It's this horrible Canadian like writer who thinks he's like a journalist. And I'm like, bro, really? We were there at a Trump rally. No, we were there at a healthcare rally exposing the corruption and the murder of patients. And I was specifically there talking about the medical mismanagement and the murder of minorities, which are predominantly Hispanic and Black. So if you think that
Wow.
I'm like a conspiracy theory, because I'm telling you of unequal healthcare inequities and that the minorities were disproportionately getting poor care because of inner city hospitals, I guess that makes me a conspiracy theorist. And by the way, the CDC backed that up because all the data said it. I mean,
Right.
shoot, we have textbooks that said caring for the vulnerable,
Hmm.
minorities and marginalized populations in inner cities. So I'm like, oh, wow, maybe they should tell the authors of all these textbooks that they're liars and conspiracy theorists too. But that's just it, is they can just say whatever they want and try and ruin your reputation. And but I'm like, dude, I just survived New York. You're going to have to try a lot harder to hurt my feelings. And so we actually just like laughed it all off. And every time like something we said comes true, like, yeah, dude, we told you that they were killing people with remdesivir. Yeah, dude, we told you the ventilators were dying. We like to send them a little like, email that says, we told you so. And so he's lost a lot of followers. Like, and he
What?
can't get like really, I guess, like good news stories or something, like however it works as journalists. So
So
it's
what do you,
interesting.
what do you, okay. So this guy shows up at your door. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? What do you think you did?
Like I open up the door and it's the feds, and all I can think of is like, oh my god, I was one like I like was on the Capitol lawn using the porta potty. I'm gonna get arrested for being near the Capitol, and I'm like, because you don't know what's gonna happen. I'm like, they arrested all these people, but I'm like, oh my god, I was on the lawn and I went to the porta potty, but it was the only porta potty, and so I'm like, can I help you? And I'll have to show you the video. Um, but it's just like, were you at the Capitol? I'm Agent so and so, and I'm like, okay. Like, I mean, what else do you say? Oh, okay. Good
Right.
morning, FBI. Would you like to come in and have a cup of coffee? Like, nothing prepares you for that type of situation. You're just kind of like, okay, can I help you? And so he's like showing me some pictures that were printed out. And he's like, so were you there at the Capitol? I'm like, yeah, I was at the porta potty lawns. And he's like, these were, where did you get this photo? And I'm like, well, it's from my social media. It's public. You can look at it. I think it's still there. It's been a month. And he's like, so what were you doing there? And I'm like, well, we were a block away doing like speeches about healthcare inequity and the COVID pandemic and the poor treatment of these people in the inner city hospitals. And he's like, okay, and so did you call 911 5 times on this date he's like, at this and this and this time? And he breaks out the record of the transcripts. And I'm like, yeah, you have the transcripts. And he's like, and did you use your phone, your personal cell phone? I'm like, yeah. Would you like to see the calls? I've made a lot of calls, but I'm pretty sure we can scroll through and find them. But I'm pretty sure that was the time that I did it. And he's like, and you called to tell them that Antifa was here. And I'm like, yes. He's like, how did you know it was Antifa? And I'm like, because all these white dudes just like piled out of this Burning Man bus and started to strap makeshift tactical gear onto their bodies. And that didn't look like an official government organization when you have like a spare tire on an old school bus and like these guys haven't showered in a week. That doesn't look like a professional military operation. And he's like, and so why did you call 911? And I'm like, well, they were going to hurt the old people. These guys didn't look like they just came to hang out and eat sandwiches and drink soda pop. They looked like they were going to do something stupid. And I didn't want the old people hurt. And he's like, well, why'd you call 5 times? And I'm like, well, if you look at your transcripts right there, nobody would send the police. Nobody would do anything. He's like, so you kept calling? I'm like, yeah, because I thought maybe they would send the police to save some people because that's what they do. You call police if bad people show up,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I'm literally like, because bad guys were there and you call the police when bad guys show up. But the lady wouldn't call the police. She told me there was security there, but there were only like 10 like police officer security type people. I have to look at the pictures and see if they were like police officer people. But there was like a fire truck and an ambulance and like 6 EMTs and then firefighters. Because I thought that was weird that they would want like a fire truck there. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that's kind of weird. Um, so I was just like looking and I saw that and I didn't even pay attention to like the police or security team. And they're like, okay. And they're like, do you have anything else you'd like to add to that? And I'm like, yeah. could you guys not have called to do this? Because this is a little stressful. Like, and I ask them, like, am I going to jail? I don't understand why you're here. And they're like, well, we just wanted to talk to you about the situation. And then once again, I'm like, and you couldn't call me? You showed up at my house? And I mean, and I'm like, because I'm thinking, I'm like, what if they did take me and my kids were home? Luckily, they were with their godmother.
Yeah.
Like, what would have happened? Like, I don't even know anymore because the rules don't apply to COVID culture and the COVID cartel. Because I
Right.
mean, what if because I was on the lawn using the porta potty, that I could have been arrested? I don't know. And would they have taken my children? I don't know. And I mean, after that, it was just so stressful. Like after that, like my immune system crashed because you're just like the stress of that. And it's like, who do you talk to when the FBI shows up at your house? You can't just like, I still don't have any friends. I'm like, who do I talk to?
Yeah.
On top of just moving to the new house, on top of being unemployed, on top of like, the FBI like showing up at your house. Who do you talk to about that? Like
Well, and
there
here,
is no like
here's my
no
thing is
one.
this is like total speculation, but in the mainstream media, I don't recall or remember seeing anything about a group of nurse advocates for the mistreatment of patients, especially minority in DC. So
No.
I mean, the whole insurrection breaking in to me is not only a cover for what was going on politically, but your guys' cause as well. Now, from what I'm piecing together, it sounds like.
Yeah, because we were there and it was a big stage with like a big backdrop. And I mean, there were doctors there, we were the nurses, there were lawyers there, constitutional lawyers, there were
Wow.
families talking about what was happening to their loved ones. I mean, there were like 50 of us and like a crowd of like 100 or so that were listening to what was going on. So it wasn't like we were like, I don't know, just having a picnic. I mean, we had attorneys saying that they were filing lawsuits for the abuse going on in these hospitals. We had doctors saying that they're killing these people. And there were news people there. And I'm like, nothing other than that Vice article. Everything else got scrubbed. That was actually like positive things because we had Telemundo was there, the BBC was there. Um, none of it is there except for that Vice article.
Yeah, and why wouldn't it be?
And
A bunch of white people with Trump memorabilia fucking raided the the Capitol. So that took precedent.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
and then that Vice article is like, I should have sent it to you. We didn't have enough time to like prep because I said, man, you're in for a wild ride here. I could have sent you the article and you could have like cross-referenced it with my Facebook post because he's like, I was at the White House. And I'm like, actually, dude, first, you mentioned my name twice in the list of people who were there talking about stuff. So apparently there's two Nicole Siroteks. And second of all, there's misspelling in your article a year later. And third, I was not at the White House. I was behind the Capitol and I was talking with other healthcare professionals about the mistreatment of minorities in inner city hospitals. And then the best
Wow.
thing is several months later, it comes out about all the Indigenous children at all these like relocation camps for like Indigenous children from like almost 100 years ago in Canada, where they murdered all these Indigenous children because they have the First Nations people. It's like the equivalency of what we would call Native Americans, but for Canada. They had
Right.
murdered all these children. I'm talking like a couple thousand dead children. They found all these graves.
Oh my
And I'm
God.
like, yeah, so the exploitation of minorities, dude. What you got to say about that? Except they wouldn't murder minorities. In his own country, murdered like thousands of children. I'm like, so every time something like that comes up, we like to shit talk and send them some emails.
Hmm. I told you so.
So I told you so.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Crazy.
it's just been a wild ride ever since.
So now you're advocating legally and medically with a group of people. It takes a team to make the dream. Um, what uh what are your takes on this vaccine?
I mean, you can get it if you want it. Don't get it if you don't want it. Well, I guess I can't use that phrase anymore since they're forcing everyone to get it. But it doesn't matter if you're what's called a pro-vaxxer or an anti-vaxxer. Do whatever you need to do for your family. I don't care. Personally, I vaccinated my children. It's a whole nother discussion as to me having to tell you about the clinical trials and how they release the measles into the wild, how they're releasing polio into the wild in the next couple months here. Whole nother podcast. So I vaccinate my children, and trust me, I'm fully aware of how they truly eradicated polio with the DET and all of that. So we don't have to have that discussion. Trust me, I'm aware of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But I chose to vaccinate my kids. But it's your business if you vaccinate your own kids. But I'm going to tell you, having been a biochemist, this is not a real vaccine. It's experimental gene therapy, because this is how I have to explain it to people who are like for vaccines. And so I asked people, so if you get the polio vaccine, you shouldn't get polio, right? And everyone's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so if you get the measles vaccine, you shouldn't catch measles, right? And they're like, yeah. So I'm like, if you get the COVID vaccine, you shouldn't get COVID, right? And they're like, well, you might. And I'm like, then it's not a vaccine. Right? That's the best way to explain it, right? Because you get a polio vaccine, you never catch polio, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that's the fundamental concept. And we've used this type of technology to replace genetic sequences in the human body that were what we call defuncto or non-functioning. Like we did it in the cystic fibrosis kids 20 years ago and it failed miserably. And that was the first human experimental trial. And after that, because all the children died, granted, they only had a very short time frame to live. And this is why their families signed them up for the experimental trial. All the children died, and so they tried to repurpose it into vaccine trials, and they failed with Zika, they failed with Ebola. That's how we ended up with the 2018 Ebola outbreak in Africa.
Wow.
And all of these other things, it continued to fail until they made it successful with COVID. And so you're talking to someone who got their own flu shot this year.
But not COVID.
Not COVID.
You didn't get the COVID shot, but the flu shot you got. Okay.
Yeah. I know to some people, they're like, oh, that's crazy. But I'm like,
right. Do you get well, it's not really, because the COVID or the flu shot has been around for 50 years. So there's definitely more clinical trials and data and stuff than the COVID. That was just made 9 months ago.
I'm aware of the adverse reactions and I'm aware of what could go wrong with that. And I'm like, I'm willing to assume that risk with this vaccine, but I'm not willing to assume the risk with that vaccine. I'm going to give you all some time before I inject my family with it.
So when you say gene therapy, are you because the first thing that comes to my mind is CRISPR. You remember CRISPR, where they were?
Oh yeah, we called that genomic sequencing and insertion before I guess they gave it a special term.
Right. So is that kind of what you're referring to? Is that they're altering DNA?
Well, originally that was the concept. Like with the cystic fibrosis kids, we would do a nanotechnology particle. Then we use what was called a DNA gun. We'd use these nanoparticle, like gold particles, and the mRNA would be wrapped around the little gold nanoparticle bullet, as we would say, and they would inhale it into the lungs, and it would insert using integrase into the human genome and replace the old messed up gene that made them cystic fibrosis. And then the new gene would be inserted, and then they wouldn't be cystic fibrosis kids anymore. But the problem is it killed them in 3 weeks instead of the 6 months that they had to live in comparison to the control group. And so, yes, we've done all sorts of stuff like that. We use gene therapy in lots of different stuff, like stem cells. There's lots of tech and everything like that. I mean, CRISPR technology is also partly part of why we have synthetic insulin and synthetic hormones and stuff like that. So we can give you like a hormone that you do not create yourself to fix whatever your hormone imbalance is. So, we do this in IVF, all sorts of stuff. I have like 2 old patients of mine, they're adults now, who have hereditary angioedema because their bodies don't make this one particular chemical. So we actually give them infusions of genetic material that is this like the whatever chemical that their body doesn't make. We do it all the time.
Yeah.
Not a big deal. The deception is that they're calling the vaccine this because people trust vaccines because vaccines save lives, right? People don't know what gene therapy is. That sounds like weird and complex, and it doesn't have that tagline that comes along with vaccines. So they're going to call it a vaccine. And now we're seeing that the vaccine doesn't work because the people who I advocate for, it doesn't matter if they're vaccinated or not vaccinated. In fact, I don't even ask that question. The family will tell me 50% of them are vaccinated, 50% are not. And I mean, I literally came to the point where I started to statistically start keeping track of it. Literally, it's almost 50-50 of the people that I've dealt with across the country that are on ventilators
Mhm.
or end up hospitalized. Half of them are vaccinated, the other half are not. So
So what does that mean in terms of, I mean, just not your personal preference, but like just for the vaccine in general, is that it's not, besides the gene therapy, it's not really that unsafe?
well, it's really just not that effective. It's like, why? I mean, do you, if you had a cancer, if you're a cancer, you want an effective chemo, right? One that's
Correct.
actually going to make you better. So why are you going to waste your time taking chemo? That's not going to help you. It's not going to get rid of your cancer. It's
Right.
just, you're just taking it.
So
Why?
ultimately you're saying
It's
it's
not going to save you.
50-50. It's like you might as well just not take the chemo and it's you still have the same chance if you took it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, but at least you don't have to worry about the adverse reaction that could
Right.
potentially happen, which is about a third of the cases that I deal with as well.
So
Mhm.
do you think the gene therapy has to do with creating a new generation of illness prone offspring?
That's what people say. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't really know. But I can tell you the two things that make the world go around is money and power. So if you can keep COVID going, politicians have powers with no checks and balances, and people keep making a lot of money off the
Mhm.
COVID culture. We've got these billionaires making tests, and we've got all these new drugs coming out onto the market. And I mean, vaccines that we're giving away for free that aren't really free. So, I mean, is it about world depopulation? I don't know. Is it probably about money and power? Probably. I'm banking on money and power because that's typically what most wars and problems are started from is money and power.
Right.
So, I mean, I mean, this is now we need boosters, but did you do any quality control improvement on the vaccine that you had to make it more efficacious, meaning more effective? I mean, why haven't you revamped it and improved it in this time to get ready for the boosters? You haven't. You're still using the old vaccine that is no longer applicable because the virus is mutated. And that's stupid. You're using something that's no longer applicable to treat something that it can't treat anymore. So I'm like, they're not even going to do research and development on that for quality control improvement,
So regardless
right?
of the right, regardless of the COVID vaccine or any other vaccine, do you think it's dangerous to vaccinate a huge number of people very quickly because of mutation issues?
Yeah, and most people always ask me, so did the vaccine cause the Delta variant? And so what they do is they kind of think that when you were injected with the Delta variant and then you spread the Delta variant. I'm like, well, vaccine kind of caused Delta, but it kind of didn't cause Delta. And then I have to explain to them what evolutionary selective pressure is. So it's like survival of the fittest. If you can survive as an animal and spread your seed, you become the dominant, variant of that species, right? It's
Mhm.
like giraffes. It's the nature, the environment selected for an animal that had the longer neck to survive because they could reach the leaves at the top of the taller trees. Anyone with short necks would die off because they couldn't get the food, but the ones with the tall necks could live because they could get the food. So through generations, it continued to create a selective evolutionary pressure for a giraffe to have a long neck. And so by vaccinating, I mean, this is over like centuries, obviously because mammals replicate slower. But I mean, the same evolutionary time frame can easily be accomplished in a virus because they replicate so fast. So everyone got injected with the vaccine. And then in the beginning, nobody was catching COVID because they were getting vaccinated. And then Delta came along because here's the thing, Delta had a couple mutations in it that caused it to replicate faster and to
Mhm.
spread quicker. So if you can replicate faster and spread quicker, you can infect your host cell line or your host line, which is humans, and continue to spread and become the dominant variant. And that is how you created the Delta variant. It's called selection, natural selection of the fittest. It
Okay.
just applied from biology to virology.
Hmm.
And that's how you ended up with Delta. So once you do once the boosters come out in a widespread like rollout, we will end up with something that is 10 times faster than the Delta.
Yeah.
And that's where it's going to get really scary because it will replicate at the speed of Ebola, is what the assumption is. And they
Oh
haven't
my
started to talk
God.
about this yet, This is why people don't survive Ebola, is because it replicates faster and causes its own unique dysfunction
Hmm.
faster than the body can launch an immune response. And this is why we're seeing in Delta, when you catch the Delta variant, you go critical from day 3 to day 5. With the old original COVID variant, the original one that came from China, you would go critical by day 10 to day 15.
Okay.
We have shortened that time frame. So if you roll out on a mass implementation scale a set of boosters, and you end up with like what happened in Israel when you have like 80% vaccination rate, and now your COVID numbers are out of control.
Out of control.
You're going to select for an even faster variant than the Delta. And then that's why, I mean, because remember, didn't even it was the FDA that said don't do boosters, right? I can't remember which organization said
Yeah,
don't do boosters.
two of the top FDA officials stepped down because of it, because they didn't agree with it.
Exactly.
So
because we know, I mean, our textbooks literally tell us this is going to happen. It's like all of a sudden our textbooks, like all of the knowledge we know, doesn't happen. I mean, they taught us
they
this
say
in school.
trust the science, trust the science, trust the science, and then you turn to actual science and somebody who actually knows science, and they're like, that's fucking malarkey.
Yeah, I mean, I have like a master's in biochemistry, and I mean, literally, like my old books are like on my shelf, and I'm like, no, really, I can tell you right here. It even tells you in my textbook. This is from like 20 years ago, you know?
Wow.
And so I'm like, that's why they don't want the booster. I mean, that would be super dangerous.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. I mean, the only thing you can do is like fight against the tyranny and the bad science. But I mean, who does want the boosters? People who are going to make money.
Yeah, I don't even want the vaccine, let alone the boosters. But the people who are going to profit for it definitely want it. So
yeah, because I mean, look at all the money that's being made.
Right. So I noticed that you have YouTube up on your little podcast deal. Have they censored you at all?
Oh yeah, every time I travel like out of town, out of state, or out of the country, the Canadians take over. We always end up with strike. So we have one more strike before they take us down. But don't worry, I've got like YouTube, like Ask the Nurses 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 ready to go. We have our videos backed up onto our website, and we're actually on Apple iTunes,
because that's
Spotify, all of that.
I'm only on YouTube right now, so that was the first thing I thought of. I called my boy. I'm like, "Yo, this interview is gonna get my YouTube taken down."
You know what? Probably not, because the Australians and the Canadians are not following me right now. So you have some time, but it's really like they're like 50% of Canada is super great people fighting for freedom, and the other half is a whole bunch of indoctrinated people who hate my guts because I work with the Canadians a lot. And then there's a lot of malicious people in Australia. I'm like, y'all can't even leave your own country. Okay, so mind your own business.
They said, here's our freedoms on a platter. I can't even believe what's going on over there. That is just nuts. That's a precursor to what we're on the road to.
Yeah. Do you know, here we have people from Australia that work at the mines that they can't get back into their country. Like they have like wives and children back in Australia. They can't get their family here, and they can't get back to their family.
Well, minus not being with their family, dude. They're blessed to be over here and not over there.
Yeah, but they can't sneak their like, I mean, they're like, how do we even get our family back? And I'm like, dude, you don't even have a Mexican border. I can't help you. Like, y'all are surrounded by water.
Yeah, it's an island prison.
Well, I mean, that's what it originally was for, but
right.
I'm just like, yeah, they didn't want you to get off that island. I mean, it's insane. And like Canada, there's certain provinces that's like the equivalency of a state, where if you leave your house without your pass, it's like a punch pass or something, you can be arrested.
Yeah,
I honestly, like, when it comes to tyranny, it's Australia, Canada, the UK, and the United States.
You must have said some trigger words because you cut out again.
Yeah, see, I was talking about like the state order of tyranny.
Yeah, so and they were like, "Shut up, Nicole."
The Canadians do. Oh yeah, like they'll mess if I say too many words like that they don't like because it's the algorithm. Like the feed will cut out because it's never. You notice it never cuts out when I'm talking to my kids, or the dogs are in, or we're waiting for the dogs to stop barking. It's always once I've said too many trigger words like too quickly.
Scary times we're living in. So why don't you go through the list of the organization you started again, your podcast, and anything else that you want to promote?
Yeah, so you can go check us out. We're at AmericanFrontlineNurses.com. And you can check out our blog, our podcast, and our collaborations with Canada and several other countries, as well as getting access to the advocacy network if you need an advocate. And we also have a tab for early interventions. If you need to get ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, there are telehealth services that can prescribe it to you in the United States, as well as all of the protocols for hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, as well as mail order pharmacies from overseas that do not require a prescription. And that's kind of what we do. And we run Ask the Nurses podcast, which I have a biased opinion is pretty badass. And we reach nearly 1 million people a month in 25 different countries. I think we're trending right now in Japan. And I'm like, who's translating our podcast into Japanese? Like, I found one of our YouTube videos, like of our podcast, and it's like dubbed over with a Japanese voice of this high squeaky lady. It's like, she's like a 5-year-old, like speaking Japanese. And I'm like, and then I laugh and she's like,
you made it, bro. You made it. If you got dubbed Japanese videos, you made it.
Yeah, we're like really big in Finland. And I'm like, I don't even know what they speak in Finland. Finnish? Like, is that Finland?
I don't know either, to be honest with you.
I don't know. But like, we're like really big in Finland right now. And like, we're like trending like number 3 on like health and medicine on Apple Podcasts. I'm like, what? Thank you, Finland. We were super big in Latvia.
That is very cool. So look,
like,
Nicole,
I don't even know where Latvia is.
I want to thank you for your work. I think it's very courageous what you did in the beginning and what you continue to do to help people, especially in these terrible times of need. I want to thank you for doing this on such short notice and taking time away from your family to talk to me. And I really would like to have you back on in the near future to talk about some of the other stuff that you touched on, because I feel like that could be a whole nother episode and podcast.
Oh yeah. And I'll have to send all of my like collaborators with you, because I'm like, you're going to want to hear some of these stories. So
Please
yeah,
do.
definitely.
Please do. I'm looking for more episodes that I can create. I actually have a Crohn's disease specialist coming on that I was supposed to talk to tonight. He actually helped reverse the microbiome in your gut. So I'm interested to hear that too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we haven't even talked death certificates yet. I'm going to have to send send my friend Joy Fritz to you, who is combating the fraud on the death certificates with all the false COVID reported deaths. Yeah,
I would love to talk to her. Send me anything you want me to put at the end of this, and I'll get it up there, and then let's stay in touch and talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. You have a good night.
All right.